All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's another day, another internet rant. Just going through the motions of reading the news this morning, just going through some articles and some blog posts. Came across a fun, concise article here. We Are Destroying Software by Antares. Antares, I think. Is that how you pronounce that? Who knows? So far though, it is taking off. I think we can see here we got a nice solid view count. Let's change that to red. 120,000 views. So this is like peak blogging right here. Like nice, man. Impressive stuff. But it's short and sweet. It's kind of like it reminds me like the Agile Manifesto with how like concise it is. It makes it for a fun read and a fun react to kind of thing. So I encourage everyone in the comment section as I'm just reading over this and giving my own take on it to just comment below in the video how you think about these things. So without further ado, let's hop into it. Let's we have a lot of white space on the side, so let's just scroll this in a little bit. All right, we are destroying software. One day ago, fresh off the press. Thank you, Interez, for giving us something to look over here. So we are destroying software by no longer taking complexity into account when adding features or optimizing some of the mission. So number one, talking about complexity, no longer taking complexity into account. And we are destroying software with complex build systems. So the first two things we're talking about here is complexity. And when it comes to complexity, I want to give software engineers the benefit of the doubt and just say, I don't think we're not going into software projects with the idea of making it complex on purpose. I would hope that as an industry we know that, hey, simple is better. Simple is better. Look at Apple, all right? Apple, they make a simple UI, simple everything for the end user. That's at the end user level, but same. If people like using simple things, they probably like writing simple code, especially when it comes to adding new features. The problem is that we're not, I like how he says, we're not taking complexity into account. So we're doing the feature, and maybe we're not planning on how complex it actually is going to be to implement. I think is what we're going at here. Like, oh, this sounds like a great idea. We just go into it without taking the time to account for how complex it might be. And maybe if we took the time to account for that complexity, we would prevent these features from getting made, saving some engineering hours. Okay, we're destroying software with complex build systems. You know, it depends what is defined as a build system. If you look at how compiling has been over the past couple years, you know, I don't know if anyone here has used CMake or used NMake to make your C++ code files work, but that is way harder than using like Go or using Cargo or using like a Java virtual machine to compile your code. I feel when it comes to compiling and building your code, the building and compiling has definitely gotten easier for an end-using programmer. Like, you don't have to worry about that stuff and the linking too much, unless you're really getting into it. But I think like the complex build systems is like, hey, do I really need a CI/CD pipeline with all these extra extensions, doing all these, you know, Sonar Cube, code scanning, static analysis? I mean, it's great. Build systems are great. They make the developer experience really fun. But when you have an entire industry called DevOps, where you have a team of 12 developers that their sole purpose is to like maintain the build system, ask yourself, like, maybe I just need a cron job, and maybe I could write some shell scripts to do this entire build thing for me and not do what the mainstream's doing. I feel like everyone is going to school and kind of getting this idea of CI/CD pipeline and, you know, GitHub workflows, Jenkins, Ansible, which is great. I mean, these companies will like basically pay you to take their certifications so that way you feel validated and can use their software later on. But you can really just build software with cron jobs and a dedicated build machine. It does not have to be it does not everyone has to do the same thing. So I'm going to say with that. Maybe that's too much of a rant for just these first two things. So let's keep going. Let's keep going. We are destroying software with an absurd chain of dependencies, making everything bloated and fragile. You know, I like this idea of bloated. How often does one import an entire library, an entire DLL, just to use one function in that entire library? That is like the biggest pet peeve. Like I actually like I've done it before. Not gonna act like I'm perfect. I've done it before where I've used a library that maybe is like 30 kilobytes big, a megabyte big, and I really only needed like one function from it. It's yeah, that just is it's huge. It's terrible. When we're talking about chains of dependencies, it is crazy how much the computer science ecosystem relies on open source software and just like third party developers developing stuff that is like the underlying systems of how your actual system works. When you're using dependencies from 2004 and 2003, because you know me, Mr. Perl developer over here, there is always a sense of like you're like I don't know, every passing day, every time you have to add a new dependency, or every time you're thinking about doing like a language update, you're like terrified if your dependencies are going to be able to make it with you. And if they're not able to make it with you, well, you have to maintain that dependency now. If you want your software system, does that make sense? So I'm basically like, hey, I'm going to use these dependencies that no one's worked on in 10 years, in 12 years. And I'm going to update my language to the newest version. And I'm going to pray that because it's still like a minor version change, it's not going to break my system, my program. I mean, you're just hanging on for dear hope. And yeah, it's just like there's so much bloatware out there. Even if you look at the game market, I know like everyone's freaking out about these Unreal game engines and these Frostbite engines and how like games now are 500 gigabytes big. Where it's like, dude, like what's going on? Like I know hardware space, hard drive space, and RAM is like awesome these days, and so like memory size and disk space is no longer like really talked about. But sometimes I'm like, damn, we this application could be like 30 megabytes big, but for some reason it's somehow 300. I don't know how it got there, but it's there. Just interesting how that software has been going down that rabbit hole. All right, number 4. We are destroying software, telling new programmers don't reinvent the wheel. But reinventing the wheel is how you learn how things work and is the first step to make new and different wheels. Really like this. I really like this. I've been told don't reinvent the wheel like 1,000 kajillion times, especially in university, especially in jobs. It's like, dude, there's a module for that. There's an npm package for that. Like, don't worry about it, dude. But then you get into that absurd chain of dependencies. It's like a what's it called? It's like a cycle that feeds on itself, a feedback loop. And I get it. There's some wheels that you probably don't want to reinvent, like reinventing a wrapper to the Win32 API. You probably don't want to make a module that like reinterfaces with the Windows operating system. I mean, you could, and you probably don't want to make a dependency. You don't want to make a wheel that just builds a like a CRUD REST API or builds a like a reverse proxy. If there's a module that does that, like awesome, use it. That's going to take a lot of time to do. But if it's a simple task, like if there's like a task that needs to get done, are you going to use a third-party module to get that task done if it exists? Or are you going to take the time to reinvent the wheel to like work better in your software environment, cater to your needs? You know, it's it's I think sometimes you should use software that's been made before, but other times you can definitely use it as a learning opportunity. Be like, I'm just gonna do it myself. I'm just gonna do this myself real quick. I think I know how this works. I might just need to do a little bit more research, read a couple Wikipedia articles, and maybe I can get this to work for myself and how I want it to work. Um, yeah. Okay. We are destroying software by no longer caring about backwards API compatibility. I am definitely a stickler for this. Like or I guess I am one that does not understand the importance of backwards API compatibility. And I was recently watching, I was thinking Scott Hanselman and Mark Rusinovich, the Microsoft developers, and they were talking about how Like Windows doesn't get enough credit for how backwards compatible Windows is. Like you can still run. I think you can run like DOS applications. No, you can't run DOS applications on Windows 10, but you can like run Windows 95 and like Windows XP, like .exe executable files on a Windows 10 and on a Windows 11 operating system. And if you look at like how the Windows operating system works, it has like been so backwards compatible to where if you're building applications that just run on Windows, like you don't have to worry about being such a follower of the API spec. It's pretty good about, being backwards compatible after every update that happens. Whereas if you look at Apple, look at some of these applications out there. I mean, like, dude, they'll do a minor version change, and that entire API, like the default value might change, default return value might change, something might happen. So, you know, building backwards compatible APIs is super cool, super important. Um, I didn't prioritize it when I first got into the industry. I was like, oh yeah, like this is a terrible API. Like I just look at an API, I'm like, this is terrible. Like this is so complex. We should remake it to be better. Like my mind's like, let's remake it to be better. But then after talking to some people that have been in the field for 20, 30 plus years, like Jake, we have customers that use this. And if we are going to change an API, like officially to be better, it is like a big deal. It can't be done just willy nilly like in the next update patch. You gotta kind of have to plan that out, make a big announcement that hey, this is like almost like version 2 of the software when that happens. So backwards compatibility underrated is super helpful in the long game. I'm talking about when you have users that have been using your software for like 10, 20 years like that. Something I have a hard time grasping, but is super cool. We are destroying software by pushing for rewrites of things that work. So kind of in a direct counter to this guy up here. Kind of like directly, not in the same, it's not in the same contradicting. They're contradicting each other. We are destroying software, pushing for rewrites of things that work. And I think what this is really trying to mean is like, hey, if I'm in a code base and if a thing has been working, it might not make sense to anyone on the team currently. I mean, it just might look it's legacy code. There's not a single unit test that's been made for this software. It was written in 2006, but it works, and it doesn't really, like we haven't had bugs with it. I think just like having the documentation spec. I mean, honestly, when time finds the ability, when you have the time, maybe going back and refactoring that would be cool, but it's not like a huge priority just because me as the developer doesn't understand how something works doesn't mean it needs to be rewritten so that way I do understand it. Um, it works. And if there's documentation for how it should work, what this function expects and what its output's going to be, that is all I need to know. I don't need to rewrite it because I don't understand it. I think that's important. And also on the things of like rewriting things that work, I think it's also a symptom of everyone jumping ship every 2 years. Like software is like one of those things where people are just like corporate sluts in the sense that they will work for a company for 2 years and then jump ship because they get like a 40 to 50K raise. And then you have people that wrote software that are no longer there, and no one can explain how that software works except the person that was there. And so when there's like a high turnover rate, you can get some really complex things. But if it works, it works. Don't need to understand it. Another time, when you have time, maybe you can rewrite it, but not don't make it a priority. We are destroying software by jumping on every new language paradigm and framework. This guy's definitely a JavaScript developer. I mean, come on. That's like textbook JavaScript problem right there, dude. What? Couldn't relate, dude. Couldn't relate as a C developer. Couldn't relate as a Perl developer. Couldn't relate as a C# developer. But if you're in JavaScript world, that's crazy. That is crazy. I don't know though. I mean, it is interesting seeing like Zig and Rust compete for each other. Like I feel like they like some languages solve the same problem. It is it's interesting. It's interesting because I feel like some languages are good at some things. Like Go, you probably want to use Go as your default backend server language because it's just good with concurrency. It's really good with concurrency. So that language actually has a purpose. Some things have purpose, and then some things like usurp the purpose of others. If there's ever something that's like good all around, I will cast high doubt. I'll cast high doubts. Um, yeah, yeah, I don't know. And there's obviously like functional programming languages, and there's object-oriented programming languages, and there's like procedural programming, and it's like they're good. Some things are good, but not everything is the end all be all. And I really they were talking about adding Rust to the Linux and Windows kernel, and it's like you can, dude. Like you could add it to the kernel, but it's like the people that are coming in with this new language and this new idea. Um, C's been around since like 1960, and are those people that are like really happy about Rust, really happy about this new language they're talking about now? Are they going to be around in 10 years when the new language, the new awesome thing comes around? Interesting thought. You know? Would you rather write and have a dependency with a language that's been around for 40, 50 years, or take a chance on this new and better language, but the maintainers and people that use that language might also jump ship once a new language comes out? I don't know. Just an interesting thought with that. Something that was in my head when I read that. Okay. Um, we are destroying software by always underestimating how hard it is to work with existing complex libraries for creating our own stuff. I mean, yeah, sometimes you think that a task is super hard to do and that you need a library to help you with this thing, where in reality, you can probably do it yourself. And a recent thing that comes to mind is we were trying to recently, me and some teammates were trying to write some code that would, you'd have a parent process and a child process, and we wanted the parent process to be able to read the child process's like standard output without it being blocking, so that we could like the parent could read it as it's going, and not wait for the child process to end before it had to read. Anyways, point is there were some libraries that were said to be able to do this. Like, oh yeah, here's a library, and if you use these functions, you should be able to do that with our library. However, that library was written a long time ago, and it actually was not working the way we thought it would. It was being hard to set up and use. And after like just struggling with that for 4 or 5 hours, it's like, okay, well, I'll just take a deep breath. What does a parent process need in order to read a child process's standard output? And just starting from that and using the actual Windows 32 just API for that stuff, we ended up, making it from scratch. If a complex library is taking too long, just take a deep breath. Ooh, what is actually needed to make that work? Go back to, college. Go back to your studies of computer science. What does it need? And maybe you can make it yourself. And now with ChatGPT, like you can just like keep asking it questions, and like kind of reason your way to an answer, which is super cool, super fun to do. Okay. This is actually like becoming kind of a long. I thought it was going to be like 4 minutes of me talking about this stuff, but we're just going. We're having fun. We're ranting. Now I'm reading a rant, and now I'm ranting. See how that works? That's kind of funny. I like that. That's cool. We are destroying software by always thinking that the de facto standard for XYZ is better than what we can do, tailored specifically for our use case. I've never actually ran into this problem before. It'd be interesting, especially like maybe like when you're on a highly scalable project, or maybe something that's like super, like you got like thousands, maybe millions of users using your stuff, and there's like a standard for doing that. But you and your team can make a solution that's maybe even better. Because in my mentality, my book, it's like, okay, I'm gonna use like TLS for my communication between systems. I'm gonna write software that lazy loads things that aren't needed until it's actually needed. Um, I usually have used standards throughout my career, throughout my like software building process to like make it work as expected. But maybe there's some ways of doing things that that could be better. I'm trying to think off the top of my head some things that might be different. And now that I am thinking about it, I'm like, huh, maybe there are some standards that I do in the back of my mind question. It's like we really do it that way. It's kind of complicated for the end user. It's kind of complicated for the implementer, but we do it this way anyways. And so maybe questioning, is this complicated? I think if there's any complexity that a standard brings, you could question it and ask yourself, is there a way that we could do it that's better for our use case? Interesting stuff. I have no really deep thoughts about this one though. All right. We are destroying software, claim that code comments are useless. Dude, I mean, chat, how do we feel? Chat, how do we feel about this one? Claim that code comments are useless. I have one problem with the comments, okay? I actually have two problems. Two problems. One, I'm a terrible speller. So every time I like make these elaborate comments explaining how my software works, it's littered with just atrocious English spelling. I'm a computer science guy. I'm not an English guy. And so you might have a hard time reading my comments because it's not even in language. I mean, it attempts to be English, but it's not English. And two, whenever that API eventually changes, whenever change actually does happen eventually, you want to also make sure you update the comment, or else now you have this dead comment that is telling everyone the wrong thing, which has happened before. I know you've been in some code bases where the code has changed, but the comments have not, and now you're getting gaslit. You're getting gaslit by some comments. So obviously having code that writes itself in documentation is super important. But and I also overall I do think I think that comments are useful overall. But I do understand the argument as well that they are useless. I can understand that. And personally, if I work on something that trips me up hardcore, you bet there's going to be a comment in that. And I hate Google Docs, anything that's external to the code base. Like if you got to look up documentation that's outside the code base, like might as well just not exist, dude. I mean, it can exist, and maybe you have some good grepping mechanisms to grep that stuff out, but that README file better be in the code base, or there better be a comment in the file header somewhere, because I'm not like, dude, no one, you cannot expect the developer, you cannot expect the person reading your code to go outside the code repository to find documentation. It's just not good. Not good. That's probably uh, where I draw the line in the sand. We are destroying software, mistaking it for purely engineering discipline. Yeah, yeah. There was a nice Venn diagram I saw not too long ago. It was like, here we go. We're gonna draw it out, dude. You ready for this? We got your red. We got your. Oh my God, we got some yellow. Holy smokes. It's beautiful, guys. It's beautiful. We'll hit some blue in here, dude. Like, what is computer science? Was the hypothetical question. And obviously it's engineering. You have your engineering side and your red, doing big math, constructing architectures that last 10, 20 plus years, the maintainability side of it. You have like this art side. You have an art side. You got to build it in a way that is beautiful and visually compelling to the person using it. There is that perfect point of engineering and art, and when they mix together, you have Steve Jobs. You have Stripe. You have, what's a good company that's also really fun? I don't know, maybe like Uber and Airbnb. You know, like think about how easy it is to order Uber. Like order an Uber. That software is an engineering feat, but it's also artistically very easy for the end user to just, I need a car, I order in, I give it an address, and it comes to me. There's something beautiful about that and artistic about that that engineering cannot uh, comply. And I can't remember the third one. There's a third one as well. It might be like psychology. It might be math. It might have been like people skills. It might have been like, yeah, it might have been like people skillish, like communication, being able to communicate how things are going to work. I can't remember what the third one is. I know if you do a Google search, like for the computer science Venn diagram of what is computer science, there's three things. I'm gonna go with communication because like it's complex stuff, and one of the reasons why I like making YouTube videos is because I have to be able to talk about complex things to an audience, and hopefully it's kind of like training for me. For me, it's training. I'm like, oh, I have to talk about these complex things, and hopefully a YouTube audience will understand it. If they do not, then I'm failing at my communication skills. So it's a good like practice in that sense. So communication is super important. It's not purely engineering. There's a lot more that goes to it. I will say NVIDIA is pretty hardcore on the engineering side though. Like those graphics cards, man. Those graphics cards are an engineering feat, dare I say. We are destroying software by making systems that no longer scale down. Simple things should be simple to accomplish in any system. You know, I envy the developers out there that work in systems that are simple to accomplish things in. You want to do something, you have a thought, you go on ahead, you make a change, and your thought can be seen. Simple things should be simple to accomplish in any system. I kind of want to take that quote, post it on LinkedIn, post it on Twitter, and just like feel righteous because that is like an ideal. That's an ideal. I would love to work in a system that is simple to make changes in. And that is obviously not the case. It really is not the case. There's a couple reasons for that. Depends like what you're making. I think that if you're making websites, you do have a nice benefit of the doubt because you can just write your change and hot reload the browser window to see your change. Like that is nice. If you make websites, you don't understand how hard it can be sometimes to see the changes you want to see. Especially like it's hard to talk about necessarily, but imagine you're building an application that's run. It's like OBS. It's like Discord. It runs on your computer. It's not a web client. It runs on your machine. If you want to make a change to that code and see how it works on the app, on the web app, or how it works on the desktop application, you have to make the change. You have to like remake your discord.exe file and reinstall Discord on the target machine, or you have to like find like build that direct.dll file and copy and paste it on the target machine and see if that new change worked. Yeah, I envy that. Simple things should be simple to accomplish in any system. I'm gonna have to think about this one and how that relates to me when I'm making desktop applications and if there's ways to make it simple. I'm gonna have to reflect on this one. We are destroying software trying to produce code as fast as possible, not well designed as possible. I think, yes, in any stand up, in any sprint planning, if you realize that people are not planning and designing this thing well, shut it down instantly. Shut it down. No, we're not doing this. We're not doing this user story. Y'all don't even know what the problem is. Y'all don't even know what the inputs are. Like, what are the edge cases? Do you even know what an edge case is, dude? Like, what are we doing? Let's hold the horses. I get it, especially in startups. Startups are the only exception because you got to make money. If you're in a startup, yeah, you just design that thing or you just make it as you go and try to get some cash flow as quick as possible. But if you are working on a legacy system, and if you're already working on an established company, bro, how is that change going to affect down the line? Super, super important. We are destroying software, and what will be left will no longer give us the joy of hacking. I think that was just a fun little one at the end here. If we have terrible software, then it won't be fun to hack. It won't be fun to play with. It won't be fun. It's like you're taking the joy out of programming. The more terrible you make it. If you make software that's like annoying, bureaucratic mess that's hard to make changes in, then it takes the joy out of it. Takes the fun out of it. Um, Kind of a little bit of poetry at the end there. So that was the end. I mean, that's the end of the article there. Good little read. Good little, just rant. Internet rant by Anaraz. Thank you for writing this. I think you're getting rewarded for this because you got a lot of views. So we'll keep it like that, man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hearing the rants. If you have anything to say, comment below. I'll reply back to all the comments. So cheers. Peace.